Need to check the list of used names before writing. The used names from the file: Ethan, Ryan, Claire, Gerald, Dylan, Cassie, Patel, Adrian, Garrett, Penelope, Bruce, Marcus, Sienna, Harold, Loretta, Wesley, Pat, Owen, Nate, Linda, Becca, Joel, Conrad, Ingrid, Douglas, Theo, Vince, Mara, Jim, Teddy, Rosalind, Terrace, Philip, Harlow, Clearfield, Knox, Sawyer, Vivian, Denton, Freddie, Al, Patricia, Nolan, Sandra, Fletcher, Diane, Bet, Spencer, Brooke, Ray, Tara, Cole. New names I'll use: Liam, narrator; Delia's sister; Dad equals Walter; Mom equals Renee; estate attorney, Mr. Hoffman. I turned 32 the year my sister handed me an envelope at my own birthday dinner and told me to open it in front of everyone. There were 8 people at that table: my mother, my aunt, her husband, 2 of my cousins, my sister's boyfriend, and my father's business partner, a man named Walter who had been in our lives for so long that my sister and I called him uncle, even though he wasn't. My actual father had been gone for 14 months. His chair at the head of that table had been empty since November of the year before, and nobody had moved it. Nobody had sat in it, and nobody talked about why we kept setting a place for him anyway. So when my sister slid that envelope across the table to me, gift wrapped in the kind of gold foil paper she bought in bulk because she thought it looked expensive, I assumed it was a card. Maybe a check. She'd been generous like that since our father's estate had started moving through probate. Generous in the way people get when they think they've already won something. I picked it up. It was too light to be a check. She was smiling. I don't mean the kind of smile that reaches a person's eyes. I mean the kind that stops exactly at the cheeks and doesn't move anywhere else. I'd seen that smile my whole life, and I used to think it meant she was nervous. I was wrong about that for a very long time. I opened the envelope. It was a DNA testing kit. One of the consumer ones, the kind you order online for $60 and spit it into a tube and mail back and wait 6 weeks for. Inside the box flap, she'd written in her own handwriting: "Maybe this will finally explain why you've always been so different from the rest of us." She laughed first. Then her boyfriend laughed. Then there was a silence at the table that I don't know how to describe except that it had weight to it. The kind of silence that means everyone heard something they weren't sure they were supposed to hear. My mother said nothing. That's the part I kept coming back to later. Not my sister's face. Not the way my aunt looked down at her plate. Not the way Walter quietly folded his napkin and set it on the table like he was getting ready to stand up. What I kept coming back to was my mother. She looked at the box in my hands, and then she looked at her wine glass, and she didn't say a single word. I put the kit back in the envelope. I said, "Happy birthday" to me. I pushed back my chair, walked to the kitchen, stood at the sink for about 4 minutes, and then drove home. My sister's name is Delia. She's 3 years older than me, and she has always been, in every room she enters, the person who decides what the room is doing. Not because she's loud, she's not. She's actually quite soft-spoken. But she has a way of framing things, of taking a situation and tilting it just slightly until the light hits it differently and everyone around her adjusts without noticing they've adjusted. Growing up, I thought that was charisma. I thought I was lucky to have a sister like that. Someone magnetic and sure of herself. Someone who always knew how to make an entrance and how to make people feel like they were included in something. I was 26 before I understood that being included in something my sister controlled was not the same thing as being safe. Our father, his name was Walter, yes. The same name as his business partner. It was a coincidence that confused people at family events for years. Our father was a quiet man. He built a commercial real estate company from nothing starting in his late 20s, and by the time I was born he was comfortable. And by the time I was in high school, he was more than comfortable. He wasn't the kind of rich that gets into newspapers. He was the kind of rich that buys the same truck for 15 years because it still runs fine. He was not demonstrative. He didn't say "I love you" the way some fathers do. Easily and often. He said it in the way he showed up. He came to every single one of my cross-country meets even when the meets were 2 hours away and started at 7 in the morning. He read every paper I wrote in college. Even the bad ones. Even the ones I handed him embarrassed. And he always found one specific thing to say that wasn't generic. Not "good job." But I like the way he structured this argument in the 3rd paragraph. You should trust that instinct more. When I was 29, he was diagnosed with a progressive illness that I won't name here because it doesn't matter what it was called. What mattered was the pace of it, and what mattered was that during the last year of his life, While he was still coherent and still himself, he had a series of long conversations with his attorney that none of us knew about. After the birthday dinner, I didn't talk to my sister for 6 weeks. She texted me twice. The first text said, "It was just a joke. You're so sensitive." The second text, sent 4 days later, said, "Mom says you need to call her." I didn't respond to either one. My mother called me on a Sunday morning and I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 40 seconds long, and in it she said that Delia hadn't meant anything by it, that I needed to consider that Delia sometimes expressed things poorly, and that it would be good for the family if I didn't make this into something bigger than it was. She did not say, "What your sister did was cruel." She did not say, "I should have spoken up at that table." She did not say, "I'm sorry. I have replayed that voicemail probably 30 times, and those 3 things are still not in it." What I will tell you is that I did take the DNA test, not because my sister told me to, because the question, once it had been asked out loud in front of 8 people, would not stop being a question. I had looked at myself in mirrors my whole life and never once thought about it. But she had planted something in me with that envelope, and the only way I knew how to deal with it was to look directly at it rather than pretend it wasn't there. I mailed the kit back in January. I got the results in March. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex, and I opened the app on my phone and I looked at the results for a long time. Then I called my father's attorney. His name is Mr. Hoffman. He'd been my father's attorney for over 20 years, handling everything from the company's legal work to the estate planning. And he was one of those men who speak slowly, not because he's unsure of himself, but because he's learned that the words that matter are worth taking your time over. I told him what the results said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know." I said, "You know." He said, "Your father knew." He said, "Your father knew. He told me approximately 9 years ago. He'd had his suspicions before that, and then he had confirmation. I think you should come in." I drove to his office the next morning. What I learned in that office I'm still processing in some ways even now. I'll try to explain it as clearly as I can. My father had discovered, 9 years before he died, through a combination of a private conversation with my mother and information he'd rather not have had, that I was not his biological son. He didn't tell me. He didn't tell Delia. He told his attorney, and then he revised his estate documents, and then he went home and he came to my cross-country meets, and he read my bad college papers, and he did not treat me differently in any way that I ever noticed. I asked Mr. Hoffman why he didn't tell me. He said, he told me he considered it. He said he thought about it for about 2 years. And then he decided that biology wasn't the thing he wanted to define his relationship with you. He said, and I'm quoting him here because I wrote it down. He said, "He's mine. That question is settled for me." I had to stop talking for a while after that. Mr. Hoffman gave me water. He waited. When I could talk again, I asked about the estate. He opened a folder. My father had structured his will with a specific provision that accounted for the DNA question, not in a punitive way toward me, in a protective way. He had anticipated, with what I can only describe as devastating clarity, that if this information ever surfaced after his death, it could be used as grounds to challenge my share of the estate. So 9 years ago, he had made it legally bulletproof. My share was held in a separate trust, structured differently from Delia's inheritance, and the trust documents included a statement, signed by my father, witnessed, dated, that read in effect, "I am aware of all relevant biological facts. My son is my son. This is my deliberate and informed choice." He had thought of everything. He had thought of everything while I had no idea there was anything to think about. Delia found out about the DNA results through my mother. I don't know exactly when that conversation happened, but by April she had contacted Mr. Hoffman's office twice, once by phone and once in writing, requesting information about the estate and asking whether the trust structure could be revisited given new information about family circumstances. Mr. 2, Hoffman told her, in the careful way that attorneys tell people things they don't want to hear, that there was no new information, that all the relevant information had been known to my father at the time he made his decisions, that the documents were not subject to challenge on these grounds. She didn't take that well. There was a family meeting in May, my mother's living room. Delia had brought her boyfriend and, somewhat surprisingly, a woman she introduced as her personal advisor, which I later understood to mean a woman she'd found online who described herself as an estate consultant and charged $800 for an initial consultation. I came alone. Delia spoke first. She laid out, in the careful, tilted way she always laid things out, that she felt the estate hadn't been handled fairly, that certain decisions had been made based on incomplete information, that she thought our mother deserved to have input on how things were structured, and that she believed a family could come to a better resolution than what a lawyer had decided years ago. She was composed. She was reasonable sounding. She was exactly the version of herself she always deployed when she needed people to move slightly, without realizing they were moving. I let her finish. Then I said, "He knew." She said, "What?" I said, "Dad knew. He knew for 9 years. This isn't incomplete information. This is information he had considered and made a decision about. The decision is written down and signed and dated and witnessed. He didn't leave anything unfinished. He finished it. He just didn't tell us he'd finished it." The room was quiet. My mother looked at her hands. Delia's boyfriend looked at the estate consultant woman. The estate consultant woman looked at nothing in particular. I looked at my sister. I said, "You gave me that DNA test because you thought it would change something. You thought if the question was in the room, if everyone knew, it would shift how people saw me and what I was owed. And you weren't wrong that I wasn't his biological son, but you were wrong about what that meant to him." She opened her mouth. I said, "He chose me. He put it in writing. That question was settled for him 9 years ago. You just found out about it now. I want to be honest about what happened after that, because I think the honest version is more useful than the clean version. My sister and I do not have a relationship right now. That may change. I genuinely don't know. There are days when I miss the version of her I thought I had. The older sister who seemed sure of herself, who I thought was on my side even when she was difficult, who I thought, at some basic level, wanted good things for me. I'm not sure that version was ever fully real, but I miss it anyway, because that's how grief works. You can grieve something that wasn't entirely true. My mother called me in June, and it was a different kind of call than the one in February. She cried. She said things she should have said at the birthday dinner 14 months after my father died. She said she hadn't known my father knew. She said she'd been carrying something for 32 years that she hadn't known how to put down. She said she was sorry. I believe she was sorry. I'm not sure sorry is enough. I'm not sure it's supposed to be. The question of my biological father is one I've held at a distance. He's someone my mother knew briefly, a long time ago, and he doesn't know I exist. I haven't decided what to do with that information. Maybe nothing, maybe something. Someday. But the man who raised me made his position clear. He put it in a legal document. He showed up at 7 a.m. cross-country meets in the rain. I know who my father was. What I think about when I think about all of it is the timing. My sister bought that DNA kit thinking she was opening a door. She was so certain that what was behind it would change the room. She'd probably been thinking about it for a while, turning it over, waiting for the right moment, deciding a birthday dinner was the place to do it, choosing the gold foil wrapping paper. What she didn't know, and what I didn't know, and what nobody in that room knew except my father's attorney, was that my father had already walked through that door 9 years ago. He had stood in that room, looked at what was behind the door, and made a decision. He hadn't left it open. He'd closed it, locked it, and handed the key to someone he trusted. When my sister handed me that envelope, she thought she was creating a crisis. She was actually just the last person to find out it had already been resolved. My father died knowing exactly who his son was. He never told me he knew because he didn't think it required saying. The trust document was the only statement he apparently felt he needed to make. And when Mr. Hoffman read that line to me, "He's mine," that question is settled for me. I understood, maybe for the first time, that some people show love not by saying it constantly, but by making sure it's protected even after they're gone. I keep that line somewhere I can find it. It's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything. I've thought a lot about what my sister actually set in motion that night. She wrapped that envelope in gold foil paper and slid it across the table, thinking she was pulling a thread that would unravel something. And she was right that there was a thread. She just had no idea where it led or who had already been holding the other end of it for 9 years. That's the thing about the choices people make when they think they have power over you. They almost never account for the possibility that someone who loved you already thought this through. Delia calculated everything except my father. She didn't factor in a man who found out a painful truth, sat alone with it, and decided that his decision had already been made and didn't need to be revisited. She built her whole move on the assumption that the truth would be a weapon. She didn't know it had already been absorbed and answered. I think about the word integrity a lot now. Not in the abstract way people use it in speeches. I mean the structural kind. The kind that means something holds together under pressure because of how it was built. Not because the pressure never came. My father had that. He didn't perform it. He didn't announce it. He put it in a document, handed it to his attorney, and went back to showing up at my cross-country meets. That's not a dramatic act. That's just a person who decided who he was and then lived that way consistently and quietly until the end. And I think that's the thing I want to carry forward. Not the story of what Delia did. Not the image of her face in that living room when I told her the question had already been settled. What I want to carry forward is the model my father gave me. The idea that you can face something that would break a lot of people, something unfair and complicated and not of your own making, and you can absorb it without becoming cruel, without retaliating, without making your pain everyone else's problem. You can just decide. And then live the decision. I'm still working on what that looks like for me. The relationship with my mother is complicated in ways that don't resolve cleanly. The door with Delia is closed right now, and I don't know if I'll open it again. There are days that's a grief, and days it's just a fact. I stopped trying to figure out which one it's supposed to be. What I know is this: the people who try to diminish you by exposing your vulnerabilities are usually counting on you not having anyone in your corner who thought further ahead than they did. My father thought further ahead. He left something behind that no envelope and no dinner table moment could touch. That protection wasn't about money. It was about being seen clearly by someone who mattered, and having that written down somewhere permanent. That's what I have. And I think, if you stayed with the story to the end, maybe you're carrying something similar. Some version of a question that someone handed you and told you would define you. It doesn't have to. What defines you is how you hold it, whether you let it make you smaller, or whether you find the steadiness to carry it, without letting it run the room. My father was steadier than anyone knew. I'm trying to learn from that. Some days I'm better at it than others. But I know where I learned it, and I know it's mine.